Watch part one of my Suzuki Quad Runner restoration. These pictures pick up from that. This is the frame repair that was done. These bottom rails were rotted out, have been cut out, and new tubes welded in. They needed to be bent up and joined to the other tubes using what I call spuds. That's pieces that fit underneath the join to weld to. My welding's pretty rubbish, as is seen in these photos, but I think it ended up a lot better than what it was, certainly a lot better than it was. The original parts of the frame that could be left in place, the new tubes were welded to, which meant that there wasn't a lot of change in shape of the frame. After I'd done that, I determined that the front of the frame, not rusted but bent, and so these pieces were cut out of the front of the frame, and the front then straightened. It was first weakened by a series of cuts through the frame, and then these pieces bent up, fabricated and welded in to where the others were cut out. That's showing them there being welded back in, and that's the finished product there, those bottom curves. So the frame's back together now in these photos, and I used some rust converter to clean it up further and give some of the parts a shot of paint. Then started assembly. This steering column was bent, so I lined it up with a square and mounted it to a jig so that I could heat it and bend it straight. That must have been damaged also in the accident that bent the frame. Then I started on front brakes, mounted dismantled the brakes, and these are the shock absorbers and rear axles. I put the wheels back on it and made it effectively a rolling chassis before I started on the brakes, or mounted the engine back in it. You can see the damaged seat there that I repair later on. So the next part was to dismantle the front hubs and put new seals in them. I determined that the bearings in the front axles were fine, so these are the part numbers and things for the seals on each of the axles, the front and the rear axles. The part numbers are shown there. That's the part number for the transmission seal. Then I actually reconditioned the brakes. The front slave cylinders were seen. These are some photos of them in some detail of the originals. I ordered a dormer slave cylinder from a Suzuki car that was slightly larger bore but otherwise fitted nicely in the place. Then I had the front, so that was the slave cylinder I was talking about. This is the master cylinder off the handlebar. I couldn't get the screws out of the top of it, so I mounted it on a plate and was able to use a centre punch to work those screws out, and eventually I got it apart and washed it and cleaned it out, and that's a front brake mechanism cleaned up. Then I did some work on the rear brakes. One of the things that were wrong was the rear brake cable from the pedal was broken. I repaired the cable, made an adapter, and made that fit again. It fits well to the bike. It's the screw fitting at the top there that was broken off. That's the connection to the rear brake lever. Then the front handbrake, left-hand side lever wasn't there, so I replaced it. It needed the new cable fed through under the fuel tank, so everything needed to come off the bike to do that, and then fed down to the rear brake pedal. These are photos from underneath the bike with it strung up in the air. At this stage the engine's been fitted, and this is a bash plate that the rear bash plate and the front bash plate. Both of those were heavily rusted. They needed cleaning up with wire brushes and painted. These are some photos of the underside of the engine and the bike, showing where the exhaust bolts in and the front foot rests and things there. The bottom of the engine case is fairly peppered with corrosion and dents. Front wheels and tie rods here. That's the petcock on the bottom of the fuel tank. Again, tie rods and front hubs. That's the brake splitter going to each side wheel. This is the oil drain plug. You can see the peppering around it from perhaps corrosion. That's a rubber seal that went around the oil drain plug that fits between that and the cleaned up bash plate there. Bit of spray paint. Now these are the transmission control levers, the reverse and the high-low range. That's the condition as they came off the bike, quite rusted, and they were sort of trial fitted and then cleaned up before fitting back on the bike to see that they work. That's the top panel bracket cleaned up now, and there's some of the brackets back on the transmission, the reverse cable and the high-low switch. That's the gear change lever. The carburetor was originally disassembled and then put back together, just cleaned, but then later it was showing it was leaking, so I removed the float bowl there and bought a carburetor kit so that I could replace the needle and seat. This is each side of the Mikuni carburetor. It had a faulty needle and seat. That's the needle and the seat shown there. See the damage to the needle there? That's where it's been worn on the seat. So that's the seat itself, not much to see there. The seat had an O-ring around it which was pretty flattened out. This is the new carburetor kit, just a Chinese kit. I also bought an air filter. The air filter gets soaked in a bit of oil before fitting. This is the petcock, which had a little O-ring in the back of it, and it was replaced, so it stopped it leaking as well. Also Mikuni. It just needed cleaning out after that. This is a heat protection between the exhaust and the airbox, and the original was quite rusted, so I made a new one and fitted it to the bike there. This is the ignition switch. You see how it was broken when I first got the bike. No ignition key at all. This is it repaired with a new ignition module fitted to it, and it also has a new base which I fabricated using a Plasti-Bond moulding and rewired it. That was the ignition switch that the original owner was using on the handlebars. So that repaired that and was quite good. That's the rear storage box. These are the condition. This is the condition of the plastics. They weren't fitted to the wreck when I got it. The strapping underneath the panels. That I found a plastic container that I made a pattern and tied a piece into the rear fender there, and then tried sort of welding it in. That's a patch on the bottom of the little storage container, and there's another piece that was required. I used cable ties initially to put the pieces in place. That's the damaged seat, and so I decided I'd repair that took the covering off it. That's the release mechanism. The foam itself had a big chunk missing out of it. I glued a new piece on and held it there with a pair of stockings. The stockings sort of held it in place, and then I got some foam backing and made a pattern. Got some blue vinyl, marked out where I wanted to stitch it, and put a series of stitches in it, and that's it upside down. I was cleaning up a few of the threads, and it then needed stapling onto the plastic base. Initially I stapled it on there with the remains of the stocking still in place, and went around using a little pneumatic stapler that was inexpensive, and it worked well, punching staples into that plastic. So the final result was quite pleasing, and so I can move on from the seat problem. Next thing was damaged racks. There was big dents in the front of the rack there, and a piece missing out of the lower bumper bar there. I made up spuds again to put in the ends of the tubes so that it would support the new pieces of railing. That's the piece in the lower bumper, and these are pieces welded now, going to be welded into the rack to get rid of those bumps out of the front. Again, spuds in the corners there. The little holes are for welding, rosette welding the pieces together, and again seemed to come together pretty well, considering my rubbish welding, which all needed to be ground flat. But these racks could be then cleaned up and given a shot of paint, and now really look the part. They needed a little bit of straightening as well. The rear rack had a damage along the thin top rail, so there's just a couple of inches welded there into it in the smaller diameter. When I went to fit the quad bike into the truck, the racks actually overhung, made it too long, so I cut 40 millimeters out of the quad bike to shorten the racks. These are ramps I made so that I could load the quad bike into the truck. I tested, they were two halves, 6 feet long. I was testing each half separately, and they hold my weight, so they'll hold the quad bike. We've got a tapered foot on the bottom and a step to sit on the bumper of the truck. These are bushes that for the hinge, 1/2-inch bolts going through the top of them there to form the hinge. That's the 6 foot length of ramp laying in the back of the truck, and that's the quad bike now pushed up into the back of the truck. It just didn't fit initially. The window wouldn't close fully. It was up against the back window, and I needed to shorten those racks like I showed before to get it to go, and then eventually got it to fit. This is just a short video of me running the basic frame around, checking that the transmission and engine's running fine.